The old Victorian house stood on a hill overlooking the town, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin. It had belonged to Sarah's family for generations, passed down from great-grandmother to mother, and now to her. Sarah had always loved visiting as a child, exploring its dusty attic and sprawling garden. But now, inheriting it after her mother's passing, felt different. It was beautiful, yes, with its stained-glass windows and intricate woodwork, but it also felt heavy. Sarah was a brave woman, a teacher who wasn't afraid to stand up for her students. But the thought of living alone in this creaky old house sent shivers down her spine. It wasn't just the age of the place, it was the stories. Whispers of strange occurrences, unexplained noises, and a general feeling of unease had always clung to the house like cobwebs. She tried to ignore the unsettling feeling as she unpacked her boxes, filling the rooms with her own belongings, trying to make it her own. She hung pictures of her friends and family, arranged her books on the shelves, and placed her favorite plants by the windows. But even with her personal touches, the house still felt like it was holding its breath, waiting. The first few days were quiet, almost deceptively so. Sarah started to relax, thinking maybe the stories were just that, stories. She spent her days exploring the town, meeting her new neighbors, and getting to know her way around. She even started to enjoy the peace and quiet of the old house, finding comfort in its solid walls and familiar scent of aged wood and beeswax. One evening, as she was reading in the living room, a sudden gust of wind rattled the windows. Sarah looked up, startled. The wind howled outside, and the branches of the old oak tree in the garden scratched against the glass. It was just a storm, she told herself, trying to calm her racing heart. But then, she heard it. A faint whisper, like a sigh, coming from the hallway. Sarah held her breath, listening intently. There it was again, closer this time. It sounded like a woman's voice, filled with sorrow and pain. Sarah stood up, her legs trembling. She cautiously walked towards the hallway, peering into the shadows. "Hello?" she called out, her voice barely a whisper. The only response was the howling wind and the creaking of the house settling. She told herself it was just her imagination, the wind playing tricks on her ears. She went back to the living room, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling that was creeping back into her heart. But that night, the whispers turned into screams. The screams started the very next night. Sarah was asleep in her bed, dreaming of sunny days and laughter, when a blood-curdling shriek ripped through the silence. It was so loud, so piercing, that she shot up in bed, her heart pounding in her chest. She sat there, frozen, listening. The scream came again, followed by another, and another, each one more terrifying than the last. They echoed through the walls, bouncing off the high ceilings, filling the house with a symphony of horror. Sarah scrambled out of bed and ran to the door, her hand trembling as she reached for the light switch. She flicked it on, but the light did little to dispel the darkness that seemed to cling to the house. The screams continued, unabated, growing louder and more insistent. She crept down the hallway, her bare feet padding softly on the wooden floor. She peered into each room, but everything seemed normal. The furniture was in place, the curtains were drawn, and there was no sign of anyone, or anything, that could be making those awful noises. The screams seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. They swirled around her, engulfing her in a wave of terror. She covered her ears with her hands, trying to block out the sound, but it was no use. The screams were inside her head now, echoing in her very soul. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the screams began to fade. They gradually subsided, until there was nothing left but a lingering silence, heavier and more oppressive than before. Sarah stood there, shaking, her body drenched in sweat. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew she couldn't stay in this house. Not another night. She ran back to her bedroom, threw some clothes into a suitcase, and grabbed her car keys. She didn't care where she was going, as long as it was far away from this place. As she was about to leave, she stopped. She looked back at the house, its dark windows staring back at her like empty eyes. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over her. Fear, yes, but also a strange sense of responsibility. This was her family's house, her heritage. Could she really just abandon it to whatever was lurking within its walls? She hesitated, her hand still on the doorknob. The screams had stopped, but the memory of them was still fresh in her mind. She knew that if she left, she would never be able to shake the feeling that she had betrayed her family, that she had let fear win. With a deep breath, she made a decision. She wouldn't run. She would face whatever was haunting this house, and she would find out the truth. She closed her suitcase, put her keys back on the table, and turned around, determined to unravel the mystery of the screaming house. The nights to come would be long, and terrifying, but she was ready. Or at least, she hoped she was. Each night, the screams returned, punctual as a train. Sarah tried everything to block them out. She wore earplugs, played music loudly, even tried sleeping in different rooms. But nothing worked. The screams permeated everything, seeping into her dreams, turning her days into a blur of exhaustion and fear. She started researching the history of the house, spending hours in the local library poring over old documents and newspaper articles. She learned about the families who had lived there before her, their lives, their loves, and their losses. She found nothing about any tragic deaths or violent events that could explain the haunting. The neighbors, while friendly, were hesitant to talk about the house. They would change the subject whenever Sarah brought it up, offering vague platitudes about old houses having their quirks. She sensed they knew more than they were letting on, but she couldn't get them to open up. Driven to desperation, Sarah considered calling a paranormal investigator. But something held her back. She felt like she needed to solve this mystery herself, that she owed it to her family, to the house, to face whatever was haunting it head-on. One afternoon, while exploring the house, she stumbled upon something she hadn't noticed before, a small, almost hidden door in the back of the hallway closet. It was made of dark wood, and it was locked. A shiver ran down her spine. She had a feeling that this door held the key to the mystery of the screaming house. She tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. She searched the house for a key, but she couldn't find one that fit. That night, the screams were louder and more intense than ever before. They seemed to be coming from behind the locked door, as if whatever was making them was trying to break free. Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She grabbed a crowbar from the garage and went back to the closet. With trembling hands, she wedged the crowbar into the doorframe and pried it open. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow staircase leading down into what appeared to be the basement. A musty, earthy smell wafted up from below, filling the air. Sarah hesitated at the top of the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew that whatever was waiting for her down there could be dangerous, but she couldn't turn back now. She had come too far. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed a flashlight and started down the stairs, determined to face whatever secrets the basement held. The air grew colder with each step, and the darkness seemed to press in on her from all sides. She gripped the flashlight tightly, her knuckles white, and prepared herself for whatever she might find. The screams, for now, had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was almost more terrifying. The locked basement felt like the heart of the mystery, a place where the answers she desperately sought might finally be revealed. Descending the creaky stairs, Sarah shone her flashlight around. The basement was damp and unfinished, with rough stone walls and a low ceiling. Cobwebs hung like ghostly curtains, and dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight. Old furniture covered in white sheets stood like silent sentinels. Boxes stacked haphazardly reached towards the ceiling, their contents unknown. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and something else, something faintly metallic and acrid. Sarah moved cautiously through the basement, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. She ran her hand along the cold stone walls, feeling for anything unusual. She opened a few of the boxes, finding old clothes, forgotten toys, and yellowed photographs. None of it seemed relevant to the screams. In one corner of the basement, she noticed a pile of old boxes tucked away behind a large, sheet-covered armoire. They were smaller than the other boxes, and they looked older, more fragile. An instinct, a pull she couldn't explain, drew her towards them. As she reached the boxes, she felt a sudden chill in the air, and the hair on the back of her neck stood on end. She hesitated for a moment, a sense of unease washing over her. But she pushed it aside, determined to find out what was hidden in those boxes. She carefully pulled the boxes out from behind the armoire, one by one. They were filled with old papers, letters, and journals. As she sifted through them, she noticed one journal in particular. It was bound in worn leather, its pages yellowed and brittle. The title was handwritten in elegant cursive, Memories of Home. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had a feeling that this journal held the answers she was looking for. She sat down on an old wooden crate, opened the journal, and began to read. The first entry was dated over 100 years ago, and it was written by a woman named Eliza, her great-grandmother. As she read on, Sarah learned about Eliza's life in the house, her joys, her sorrows, and her fears. She learned about the history of her family, and the secrets that had been buried within these walls for generations. And then, she came to an entry that made her blood run cold. It was a warning, a desperate plea for help, written in Eliza's frantic hand. It spoke of a hidden danger, a silent killer lurking in the house. A gas leak. The journal detailed how Eliza had started feeling ill, experiencing headaches, dizziness, and nausea. At first, she dismissed it as the flu, but the symptoms persisted, growing worse with each passing day. She noticed a strange, faint smell in the basement, a sweet, sickly odor that made her stomach churn. She consulted doctors, but they couldn't find anything wrong with her. They suggested it was stress, or perhaps a touch of hysteria, common diagnoses for women in those days. But Eliza knew something was terribly wrong. Driven by a growing sense of dread, she started investigating the source of the smell. She searched every corner of the basement, her flashlight beam dancing across the dusty surfaces. Finally, she found it, a small crack in one of the gas pipes, hidden behind a wall. She tried to repair the leak herself, but she didn't have the tools or the knowledge. She wrote letters to the gas company, begging them to come and fix it, but they ignored her pleas. They were too busy, they said, to deal with a minor leak in an old house. Days turned into weeks, and Eliza's condition deteriorated. The gas leak grew worse, filling the house with its invisible poison. She became increasingly weak, her mind clouded by the fumes. She knew that time was running out. In her final journal entry, written just days before her death, Eliza described the terrifying screams that echoed through her mind as the gas slowly suffocated her. She wrote that she feared her spirit would be trapped in the house, forever warning others of the danger. Sarah closed the journal, her hands shaking. Tears streamed down her face. She finally understood the source of the screams. It wasn't a ghost seeking vengeance, but a spirit trying to protect her, trying to prevent history from repeating itself. She stood up, her mind racing. She had to find the gas leak, the one that had killed her great-grandmother. She had to stop the screams, and she had to save herself. Guided by Eliza's journal, Sarah began searching the basement for the cracked gas pipe. She examined every inch of the walls, her flashlight beam probing the darkness. The metallic smell was stronger now, more pervasive. She could feel it burning her nostrils, making her head spin. Finally, she found it. Behind a loose stone in the wall, she saw a small crack in an old, corroded gas pipe. A faint hissing sound emanated from the crack, and the smell of gas was overwhelming. Sarah knew she had to get out of the basement, and she had to get out now. She stumbled towards the stairs, her lungs burning, her head swimming. She reached the top of the stairs, gasping for air, and collapsed onto the floor. She had to call for help. Now. Luckily, Sarah had managed to crawl far enough up the stairs that her head was just outside the basement doorway. She fumbled for her phone in her pocket, her fingers clumsy and unresponsive. She finally managed to grasp it, her vision blurring as she dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher asked, her voice calm and professional. Gas leak, old house, basement. Sarah gasped, struggling to speak. Help, please. She managed to give the dispatcher her address before the phone slipped from her grasp and clattered to the floor. Darkness closed in around her, and she lost consciousness. When Sarah woke up, she was in a hospital bed, her head throbbing. A doctor stood beside her, smiling reassuringly. You're going to be okay, he said. You were lucky. The gas company arrived just in time. He explained that the 911 dispatcher had alerted the gas company immediately after receiving Sarah's call. They had rushed to the house and found her unconscious at the top of the basement stairs. They had shut off the gas and ventilated the house before she suffered any permanent damage. The gas leak was significant, the doctor continued. It's a miracle you weren't killed. You must have a guardian angel watching over you. Sarah smiled weakly. She knew exactly who her guardian angel was. Later that day, after she had regained some strength, a police officer came to her room to ask her some questions. He wanted to know what had happened, how she had discovered the gas leak, and why she had gone into the basement in the first place. Sarah told him everything, starting with the screams and ending with her discovery of Eliza's journal. The officer listened intently, his expression skeptical at first, but gradually changing to one of understanding. So, you're saying that the ghost of your great-grandmother saved your life? He asked, raising an eyebrow. I know it sounds crazy, Sarah replied. But I don't know how else to explain it. The scream started as soon as I moved into the house. They led me to the locked basement, and the journal told me everything I needed to know. The officer nodded slowly. Well, he said, I've seen stranger things. The important thing is that you're safe. And we're going to make sure that gas leak is fixed properly, so it doesn't happen again. As the officer left, Sarah looked out the window at the sky. The sun was setting, casting a warm golden glow over the town. She thought of Eliza, her great-grandmother, trapped in the house for over a century, trying to warn others of the danger. She hoped that now, with the gas leak fixed, Eliza's spirit could finally rest in peace. And she knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that the screams would never return. After a few days in the hospital, Sarah was finally well enough to go home. The gas company had repaired the leak, and the house had been thoroughly ventilated. It still felt old, but it no longer felt haunted. As she walked through the front door, she took a deep breath. The air was clean and fresh, and the house felt lighter. She went straight to the basement, drawn by an irresistible force. She walked down the stairs, her flashlight beam illuminating the familiar surroundings. The basement was still dusty and cluttered, but it no longer felt threatening. She went to the corner where she had found the journal and knelt down. She picked up the leather-bound book, its pages worn and fragile. She opened it to the last entry, the one where Eliza had described her final moments. She read the words again, her heart filled with sadness and gratitude. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for saving my life. She closed the journal and held it close to her chest. She knew that she would never forget Eliza, her great-grandmother, the woman whose spirit had protected her from beyond the grave. She decided to keep the journal in a safe place, a reminder of the past and a symbol of the enduring power of family. She placed it in a locked box, along with other family heirlooms, and stored it in the attic. Life in the old house gradually returned to normal. Sarah went back to teaching, spending her days with her students, sharing her love of learning. She made friends in the town, attending local events and becoming involved in the community. The house still creaked and groaned, and the wind still howled outside the windows on stormy nights. But Sarah no longer felt afraid. She knew that she was not alone, that she was surrounded by the spirits of her ancestors, watching over her, protecting her. One evening, as she was sitting in the living room, reading a book, she heard a faint whisper. It was so soft, so gentle, that she almost didn't hear it. "Thank you," the whisper said. Sarah looked up, her heart filled with joy. She knew that it was Eliza, her great-grandmother, finally at peace. She smiled and closed her eyes, feeling a sense of profound gratitude. The haunting had ended, the mystery had been solved, and she had found a connection to her family that she never knew existed. The screams had echoed through the walls, but in the end, they had saved her life. And now, the house was finally silent, filled only with the gentle whispers of love and remembrance. The house was home. This keypoint has already been covered in the previous text. This keypoint has already been covered in the previous text. This keypoint has already been covered in the previous text. This keypoint has already been covered in the previous text. This keypoint has already been covered in the previous text.